I'll give everyone just an overview. I'm so glad you've joined. It's a collaboration, so we're involving folks from both sides of the Rockies, and because we have the expertise in bale grazing and for next webinar in corn grazing from our Alberta counterparts with the Alberta Agri-Systems Living Lab. So we're really pleased to be able to do this, and we've been working with Adrian Heron out of Alberta Beef Producers. So welcome everyone. And part of that is we're going to do a short attendee poll like we did at the last one, just get a sense of where folks are from. So we'll be moving right into Darren Brujal from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, providing a presentation. And then we're really fortunate to have Doug Skeels, Alberta rancher, who's had years of experience testing this out. So that should be super helpful. Then we'll move to a BC rancher's perspective. Some folks are looking to try that here in BC. And while Kim wasn't able to join us today, she was on the road. She did provide some of her thoughts and experiences as she's looking to test the practice. So we'll leave the questions till the end. So write them as you think of them. We're going to monitor the chat and make sure that everyone has their questions answered. Those that can't be answered in the session, we'll make arrangements to have those shared with all the registrants. And then, of course, we'll talk about our next webinars.
Okay, thanks for having me. This is great to talk about bale grazing. I really love the practice, so any opportunity that I get to talk about it is great. Just a little bit of background. This is my 32nd year in being an ecologist in the ag industry as well as the forestry industry. I worked basically half my life in BC, and now I'm back in Alberta since 2011, where I am the forage and range specialist for Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. I also taught forage crops at the U of A for the last 8 years. I no longer do that because I'm also the coordinator for the Agri-Systems Living Lab and for another living lab. It's called the Regenerative Alberta Living Lab. So again, thanks for having me, and let's get going here. Just have to learn how to advance my slides. There we go. So the majority of the material in this presentation is from these two publications. The one on the left is, there's some age to it, but that it was developed with the help of my counterparts in Manitoba, and it's actually started out our bale grazing project. So it's about 2008, I think. So it's a great one. And the second one, we worked with the Alberta government to come up with this wintering site assessment tool. So it kind of covers the environmental issues with this practice. Okay, so what is bale grazing? So it basically involves setting out the feed bales in the fall. So you regulate your cow's feed intake by using electrofencing. So you gotta be good with electrofencing to even think about doing this practice. Cows are introduced to new bales and tends to be 2 to 5 day rotations. I know a lot of people do 7, and I even know people who do 21 days or more. So that's quite, I've never seen that done. I've just watched webinars, and there's a group of folks in Manitoba and Saskatchewan that are quite comfortable doing this 21-day period, and they have, like, we're talking hundreds of cattle, right? So large operations that are doing it 21 days. So if you want to learn more, the group is called Covers, and they're a Manitoba company. So I just putting a plug out there. So typically when we think about bale grazing, we want to have at least a 2-day feed, right? So this is to help make sure that all cows have equal access to the forage, right? So we don't have the boss cows that are muscling out the other ones. So tends to be, we tend to cut it off, like start at 2 days and then tends to be 5. But again, there's people that are innovators and making 21 days work. So I think that's amazing. So I was always under the impression that the potential for waste would increase as we go longer. And again, with the numbers that they're showing us, they're getting 10 to 20% feed wastage, which I don't don't consider that waste, but we'll talk about that later. So even at this 21-day moves that they're doing, they're getting the same results as a 3 to 5 day moves. So that's fantastic. So here's just the practice. Again, some people put it on the ends and the sides. We'll probably get into that, what the difference is. And this is, I think, from the Skeels farm. Doug's our panelist here as well. So it just shows you what the practice looks like in the field. So why is this beneficial? Well, the animals basically feed themselves, right? So this reduces the tractor wear and tear. You can do, they'll spend a day to 2 days in the fall moving out bales, and then that's the amount of tractor work that you have. We've seen and talking to our producers that their operating costs are lowered. There's less manure to haul out of the yard, right? Because it's right out in the field already. Another thing that takes advantage of the urine, even though a lot of it's lost. When you're feeding out in the field, the urine stays, right? When you're feeding in the pen, it does not. So that's another benefit. Less wear and tear on your yard fencing. Your fertility is almost always improved. And why is it improved? Well, it's the urine, it's manure, and it's just, working of the cattle, the way that they work the existing forage there into the ground as well. So this all gives us quite the thatch of material in the spring, and this helps moderate soil moisture and temperature. And this I'll call it, for like waste right now, sits in the field. It can stay frozen well into the summer. So it's really interesting on how it evolves over the summertime. And the chore time is often reduced, is what we've been told. So we always have to consider when we're growing forages, we are removing nutrients from that soil. So this is just typically, this is what these numbers will vary depending on grass species, but this is the amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, phosphate, potassium that's being taken out from your soil per ton of grass. So you have to ask yourself, if you're not fertilizing, how are you replenishing these nutrients? Okay, so we've when we started to play around with this in 2011, I think it was, and this isn't Doug's farm, this is another farm, but we noticed right away that production increased dramatically where the bales were fed on a field. And this increase is a result of just basically bale residue, manure, and urine being spread on a field. And now this amount of material also moderates our soil temperatures and increases our soil moisture. And we'll see these circles. We can even see them up to 15 years, apparently, in some of these farms out in Manitoba. So they're quite long lasting, the impact of where the bale is fed. So we also typically see this increase, measurable, significant increase for 4 years. We also see increases in crude protein, but these tend to display, tend to be lost the 3rd year following bale grazing. Now, these results have been duplicated across Canada and down in the central plains and eastern US. It's quite a common practice. The benefit we have here are our frozen soils, because that's one of the biggest issues with bale grazing. So some more issues: you are importing a significant amount of nutrients to a site. So this is, as we increase the amount of nutrients on a site, we also increase the risk of these nutrients leaving that site. So if you're close to water bodies, et cetera, you have to be aware of where your runoff is going. And typically this runoff is on frozen ground, right? So it moves quite readily. So the bale spacing also affects the concentration and distribution of these nutrients across the field. So the closer our spacings, the more hotspots we're going to get, and the higher the potential of nutrient loss from the soil. And in BC, with your fisheries, it's an issue you have to be really aware of. So this is just an example. This is again 40. Oh no, this is placing a grid on 25 centers. So this is the amount of nitrogen that you're actually adding to a site, right? These numbers will vary, but this is just a basic mixed alfalfa grass hay. So it's a good feed. And this is the amount of fertilizer you can expect to be placing on your site. So if there's water running off that site, you got to be aware of where that water is going. So if we want to put a price tag on it, right? So it's actually quite a bit of nutrients available our first year following bale grazing. So it's actually not only are you saving time feeding all winter, you're typically just moving an electric wire every 3 to 5 days. You're also adding this benefit to the land. So here's some more calculations. This is one of the Alberta publications is basically saying the amount of nutrients you're actually adding. It also means the stuff that's going through the animal, the very inefficient beef animal, right? So so basically you're adding about that much in nutrients to your site. So it can add up, especially on nutrient poor ground. So again, that's why we want to highlight the importance of you should be moving these sites. They should not be, you should not have one bale grazing site. You should always be moving it. And the real big bale grazers, they tend to never go back again, right? They'll just, because they're large land holdings, they're just spreading this benefit across all their acres. So when we talk about bale grazing, we start to see there's a lot of potential for pollution coming off any wintering site, right? So we just have to be cognizant. We don't want it to do it too close to a water body. You just want to keep as much of these residues, waste, animal manure on the ground and not into our streams, of course, right? So that's one of the biggest issues with this practice. So we tend to say go there once every 3 years. We may even want to say don't go back if you can. Again, because these nutrients get tied up in a system and are slowly released over time. So it's important to spread this benefit around all your pasture lands. So, and this is just a picture again. Now I forget what my point was. Again, it's a very, I guess you don't tackle a lot of acres using this practice, right? Even if you have big herds, you're doing 10 to 40 acres a year. That's it, right? So it's quite hard to spread this benefit around to all your pasture lands. So there's some animal care issues here. Move the screen. If you have numerous different, like if you have replacement heifers, calves, whatnot, it's hard. It can be difficult to manage their new attrition planes, right? So there is, but then again, I see people who actually have calves on bales as well. So again, it's how it fits into your practice. That's the most important. The body condition, we want to ensure that we don't have thin cows out there, right? So some cows just are not good at competing for this. So the real big bale grazers, we'll call them, they just get taken out of the herd because you just can't manage for a couple cattle. So again, if you see a thin cow on there, take them off. That's my advice there. Again, water, the comfort level, and depending where you are in both provinces, sometimes the snow is great, sometimes it's not. So you tend to know your land better than everyone else. So people do use snow and people do use water. So both feed testing, again, any winter feeding, we want to make sure that they're getting adequate supplementation. So there's lots of salts used depending on the operation. We also want to make sure that there's not too much waste, right? We want to force, they'll be crying and bawling, but we want to make sure that there's as little waste as possible because they'll tend to go do the better feed first. And then, so in these larger operations, they'll put mostly alfalfa based hay. There'll be some green feed and maybe some straw, a couple things of straw just to balance it out. So when they move in, they go after the best feed first. You want to make sure every cow has equal access. The boss cows aren't hogging a bale, right? So we just want to make sure that our resource, our waste is being kept to, when we talk about waste, it tends to be 10 to 20%, regardless of system. So, and we want to use these, our electric fences to control the access to these bales. Okay, so typically, again, the high quality feed will be the first to go. So we want to also ensure there's issues with snow and keeping your juice in the line. So we just always want to ensure that they have enough feed and water, right? As with any wintering practice. Their body condition and their behavior will typically let us know whether they're adapting and working, if this is benefiting them. In colder weather, we tend to say, let's knock it down a day. So if we're doing a 5-day rotation, maybe knock it down to 4, right? Because they just need more energy, like more nutrients when it's colder. And we always recommend that shelters, whether it's trees or whether it's panels, that they have some access to shelters because we can get pretty cold, as we know. So now, how do we get started? This is on Doug's farm. So we want this practice to be on marginal land. Now, they'll do it on cultivated land, especially in Manitoba and southern Saskatchewan. I've seen it on cultivated land, but I would not recommend it. There's a twine issue. I would say keep it to your marginal land, your sacrifice pastures, etc. And please don't do it on native range. There's numerous issues there, but yeah, I just would recommend that we keep it on marginal pastures. And it tends to work better if you have a rhizomatous grass species, because that bale residue, our bunch grasses have a hard time growing through the basal residue. So again, our rhizomatous grasses do way better with this practice. And it's a legal responsibility. We want to prevent this runoff. This runoff is going to be laden with phosphorus, nitrogen, and there's issues that can pose to our fresh water. So we want to make sure that we keep this material, this runoff, from not going into surface water bodies. Okay, again, we want to, like, this practice would not work in the lower mainland, right? So I would say maybe there is people who are doing it, but if there's a shallow water table, coarse soils, you're going to lose a lot of nitrogen, phosphorus into the water, and that's going to cause issues. So again, try and keep it on your site. I know in some of your valleys in BC, this can be difficult, but something we need to make sure that's done. A lot of people, when it was first getting started, they targeted saline areas, tops of hills, eroded knolls. Now, people who have been doing it for decades or more just put it through all their pastures. Their weakest links first, of course, but again, it's not as targeted as it is here, as it was initially recommended. Okay, again, I talk about shelter here, and always soil test if you can. So here's just an example from that second publication that I showed on the second slide. Again, we want to keep it away. This is a lot of nitrogen. This is a lot of phosphorus. There's crypto in the manure, right? We just want to keep it away from our surface water bodies. So again, that second book that I highlighted at the start of this, it goes through how you would select a site for any extended winter feeding practice. Because this is what we get, and this is Doug's farm. So you get a lot of material, right? And in this standing water, this will be basically a tea color, right? It'll be full of manure and every wonderful thing that gives us. So if you have this situation, it could get you into trouble. Okay, so it's leaving. Hopefully, it's not. This is a Manitoba picture. So we want to make sure that this is not occurring, because I don't know if it's still called WALP in BC. What is the Ministry of Environment called now? Anyway, it used to be called WALP, but water, land, and air. But again, we don't want our industry to be pictured like this, so avoid sites like that. So how do we know how many bales do I put out? It's a simple calculation. Again, this, I won't go through this, but this is available online. I think it's the Manitoba one. But from what I'm hearing, and maybe Doug can add some insight later, but I'm hearing we want to go to 3%, just to include the amount of waste, right? Because as temperatures get cold, so most people are using 3% instead of 2.5. Okay, so up here, just to account for that waste, which we don't consider waste. So the density and spacing of bales should be determined by the nutrient testing of your soil. Most of our sites are, we would call them gray lubisols, high clay, very little topsoil, if any, right? So those are ideal places to place this practice. And we tend to say about 800 cal days an acre, right? So that works about 25 bales an acre, depending on bale size and whatnot. Typical spacings are 25 to 50. People go closer than that, right? So it depends on what fits your land, what you're more comfortable with. This practice is highly variable. We started off going the book rate as 40 feet, and that allowed us to actually do a second treatment within that 40 feet. So we actually bale grazed on that land twice, and I think that's why I had this picture up here. So yeah, so we went back. This is not Doug's farm. We did it on Doug's farm, and we placed the bales in between these areas just to give us more coverage, right? Okay, so sorry about that. So again, depending on what on your operation and what you're comfortable with, just if you're getting closer spacing, just be cognizant of where's your water, right? We do not want nutrients going into our public water systems. So here our bales are placed. People do both. They'll place them on the side and they'll place them on the ends, right? It's just what they are comfortable with. Sisal, of course, but it's quite a bit more. It rots in, so it's a lot easier to deal with, especially if you're moving it into any type of cropping, which I would not recommend because of the twine. So we tend to say put them on their sides because it rots out, whereas plastic, and you have to remove it, we say place that on the ends. And here's just we give 100 meters here. Again, it depends on the slope of land etc. What kind of paramaterial, depth to bedrock, lots of different issues here. So this is just an example. Now, Doug uses netting. I've never used netting, but talking with producers, they even let their cows consume the netting. So that's interesting. But again, so that's my part of this presentation. We're going to move on to Doug and Deb Skeels. Doug's going to give this part of the presentation. Doug and I have been working together since 2011 is when we first started this on his lands. And basically Doug was my living lab. And so we've done a lot of things on Doug and Deb's property. So Doug, are you ready to go? Perfect.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. I must say it's been a pleasure working with Darren for many years. And thank you for having us on here. We're really happy to be able to share our experiences, I guess is the way to say it. So go ahead to the next slide. Thanks, Darren. So the way we do it is, first thing is to figure out how many cows we're going to be wintering and for how long. And then after that, the number of cows is settled on, we can set up bales. Usually it takes 1 to 2 days to set up all of our bales for the season. We figure 10 to 12 cows per bale for 3 days of grazing. And as Darren alluded to earlier, we don't want to get too few or too many cows per bale, because then the boss cows eat all the best feed, and then the less dominant cows get pushed out. So 3 days has worked very well for us, 4 days at times, and down to 2 when it's really cold. But we plan for 3. I've estimated the cow's weight, and I estimate, well, I've weighed the bales as well. And from cow auction mart weights, I know I'm not far off, but we figure about 2.9% of body weight is what we put out in feed. So yeah, in between the 2.5% and 3%. Next slide, please, Darren. So that shows set up for when we were ready to go in the fall. It's usually done. We try to do it sometime in October, generally late. Well, we also have to pick the piece of ground that we're going to use and make sure that we're not going to have to graze that right about the time or after we want to put the bales out. So that has an effect on us, but that's 1 year's setup a few years ago. Next slide, Darren. Next slide, Darren. Yeah, thanks. So this shows our winter water system. We can't rely on snow here. We have no idea what we're going to get 1 year or even 1 or 2 weeks to the next. We had 2 weeks ago, we had well over a foot of snow here, but over the weekend it pretty near all disappeared, and now we're back to 5 or 6 inches again. But that shows our winter water system and our shelter, our windbreaks. And then in the background there is part of our bale grazing for this particular winter. Now we'll start where it's kind of straight across from the water system there. Past that post, there's a few bales you can see, and then they go on to the left and then to the far end of the picture. And so we start at the closest to the water. And that way the cows have to walk over everything that they've previously grazed day after day, and they will go back and pick through that stuff all winter long. Next slide, please, Darren.
So I didn't do a very good job. Doug's farm is located just south of Rocky Mountain House, in the foothills of Alberta, just so people are aware. Sorry about that, Doug.
Oh,
I'm fired.
No worries.
I'm fired.
Thank you. Right, no doubt.
Yeah. Hey, I'll try and advance it here.
Sure, thanks. Okay, so this is, yeah, we use net wrap, and we have used bales with twine. The very first year we did this, we set the bales out on their side, and then we tried to get the twine off, and that was very interesting, to say the least. So the second time we did it, we put the bales on end, and we took twine off early. And that also proved to be a bit of a mistake, I'll say, because as the wind comes along through the winter, then it blew the bales apart. So what we do now, and have been doing for quite a few years, is we set the bales out and then we pull the net off of the bottom of the bale so it can't freeze to the ground, and you don't have any trouble dealing with the rest of it a day or two before the cows are going to go in there and graze those bales. That way, the wind doesn't bother it, and also the deer don't bother it as much. We're kind of blessed that we don't have elk right here, right now. But you can see even the bottom of these bales that the deer have been in them, and they are in them all the time. So if there's net wrap all the way to the ground, there's two things. One, it freezes to the ground and you have a hard time getting it off. And the second is the wildlife paw it down, and that makes it really hard to get out of there. I don't want any net wrap left on my ground. Next slide, please, Darren.
Like a delay. There we go.
So there's our normal fencing tools, equipment. We use a cheap reel because the odd time during the winter they'll get knocked down by wildlife or for whatever reason. And I find the expensive reels tend to break worse than the cheap ones in the winter. We use a hammer to put in our rebar posts and a pipe wrench to take them out. So those are just ordinary rebar with a screw-on insulator, and they are about 4 feet tall. That's our normal use. We have had a couple of winters here where the snow was exceptionally deep. We had to actually go buy snowshoes because we couldn't get around without them. And we had to make longer rebar posts. I had to make some 5-foot long ones in order to keep the wire out of the snow. But that's just the things you get to deal with sometimes. You never know. So this is showing our fencing basically. So how we do it, we put a high tensile wire on both sides of where we're bale grazing. And then we just have our temporary fence running in between. The high tensile fence, we use it, move it every year. So it's pretty simple that way. You got something simple to attach to, and it's electric on both sides normally, so that cows don't have a way around to get to the bales. I think next slide, please, Darren. So that's just showing some of the cows out having a happy day in the sun, and they've probably got another day of grazing on that, what they got there for residue yet. Next slide, I think, please. Yeah. So here's some of our findings or our experiences. The cattle are grazed away from the water source, like I said, and that encourages them. They have to walk back and forth across what they've already grazed, and they'll continue to pick through it and clean it up better all winter long. We try to arrange the rows so that the cows travel upslope to successive rows of bales, as what I've found is the odd day my cows will want to play with the bales and they will roll them downhill. If it's downhill into the fence, you're in for trouble. But they generally don't roll them uphill, I've found. So we try to graze uphill. Next thing is odd time, we get a cow that doesn't respect the electric fence, and you either got to change the fencing so that they do respect it or get them out of the system, because they'll teach the others. We don't graze our first and second calvers with the rest of the cow herd. We graze them separately in feeders, as we find they don't compete as well with the mature cows. And if we force the mature cows to clean up, well, the heifers are going to lose weight. So that's how we deal with those. But that's the only ones we take out of the system. If the other cows can't compete, they don't stay. Next slide, please, Darren. And that's some pictures of what you expect. Now, some people worry about these brown spots in the middle of their pasture in the summertime, but I'm quite happy about that because you can see the September picture, and that's typical. September and October, those patches are still green and lush, and the rest of the pasture is all dry and brown. Next slide, please, Darren. So some observations is the spring moisture is preserved with the litter, and I think that helps the pasture along. The litter delays the growth in the spring and provides hauler quality through September and October, like we were saying. We avoid grazing our bale grazed areas the first year, as we find that it provides a better boost to productivity. The first year after bale grazing, some of the grasses are getting rooted better, getting pretty serious root systems under them. And then the year following that, they really produce a lot better. It's been our experience, I'll say, or our, I think that's probably as good a word as any for it. Thanks. Next slide, please, Darren. So there's a couple of things. Our cows are in there. I can't tell you exactly what month of the year that is. It's pretty green there everywhere, so I'm guessing that's probably the middle of the summer. And then a lot of people hate dandelions in their pastures, but because they say there's no volume to them, there's nothing there except a little puff. Well, that's a dandelion that grows in our pasture on the bale grazing areas, and you can see it's near as long as my arm, and there's more than a little bit of volume to it. So that's about it, I think. Thanks. Next slide, Darren. Like I said, the depth of snow has an effect. You can bale graze through a lot of snow. We found that's not an issue, but the cows, we have had it deep enough that they weren't able to, or they didn't try even to get from one row to the next unless we walked it down or made a path with the snowshoes, and then they'd follow us. But you never know how much snow you're going to get here. Wildlife, like I say, the deer are always in there, and they're always eating our best feed first. What months do I bale graze? Well, we've bale grazed November, December, January, February, and March. Not all months, all years. This year we didn't start bale grazing until the 23rd of December, and we'll be done first part of March. What we do, we bale graze our cows at a quarter section that's a couple of miles away from home, and that allows us to not have any cows around our farmyards in the wintertime, and when we bring them home to calve, we're on clean ground. That's one of the reasons that we do that, as well as there's much less wear and tear on machinery. The machinery costs for doing this system are far, far less than any other. We don't bed our cows at all on bale grazing. The ones that we feed in the feeder, of course, then we have to bed those, and they come home dirtier than the ones who are in the bale grazing with no bedding. So winter watering systems, like I say, it's whatever you have to deal with. Here we can't count on snow, so we have to have a water source that's dependable. So ours are solar powered, so that's pretty dependable, and that's about all I got, I guess. Thank you.
Great, that's fantastic. That's sure a lot of information and a lot to think about. I really appreciate that. We've got a comment. We were hoping to have Kim Hardy from the Double C Ranch out of Horsefly here, but as with rural internet and being on the road, she wasn't sure she could make it, but she did provide just some of her thoughts. She's looking to be one of the daughter sites in the Living Labs. And I'll just read out what she sent. So the reason why they're looking at trying it on their ranch is when their fields were established, they're essentially bladed off with little to no topsoil left. So they're hoping to use the bale grazing to put down some much needed organics and nutrients to promote that grass growth, as we've seen on Doug's farm, that was exactly the case there. And they also wanting to improve the soil biology. They're also having some challenges working against hawkweed and are wondering if we can suppress the growth and vigor of the hawkweed on the fields by increasing the grass production. And it's great you talked about wildlife, because they also have elk in the area. And so they're looking at how they might modify that, maybe not by putting the entire buffet out, but maybe just putting some less and trying to do that in a little bit different way. And as well dealing with, like you have, Doug, that unpredictable winter weather. So those are some of her comments. And just, I see there's already 2 questions in the chat, but maybe Doug and Darren, if you have any comments for Kim, as she's going to be trying this out, especially with what you've seen as far as weeds and weed suppression, for example.
I don't think it's going to help the hawkweed. Just the opinion I have, and it does bring thistle to sites, right? It's hard to get hay without, and if you're buying your hay, so thistle tends to be, it tends to like bale sites. No, I don't think Doug's had that problem. Doug, no.
No, I really haven't to this point.
No. Yeah, so that's but I've seen that being a problem. So I wouldn't call it a good weeds suppression. From what I understand about orange hawkweed, it tends to be like a sulfur issue in the soil, right? So there's other things, but again, I wouldn't think it's actually hard on legumes, I thought, but in a couple of our sites, it hasn't even affected our legumes. So.
Well, that's really terrific. Okay, well, thanks. I'll pass that on, and I know she'll be interested to see this. And
the
we'll move
elk
into...
are going to be an issue. Yeah, I don't know
Yes.
how you get away with that. Right, that's an issue.
I've had some good tips, but yes, I think they're pretty aggressive. So all they're really getting busy in the Q&A. So I'll just start out here from Mike. What is the best spacing for bales? And that came on earlier in your presentation. And how far does the fertilization soil health attributes spread from placement center?
Hello, Mike. Mike's been a longtime friend. So again, it depends on your soil tests and where the surface water is, right? So I initially, when we started this, we wanted to go 40, and Doug has went closer than 40. And at Doug's property, we actually doubled. So we did it, and then we did the following year, put bales in the middle, and we still couldn't rise our nitrogen, phosphorus up any levels, right? It's a soil that's derived from a forest. So all the carbon was above ground. So we're trying to put it back into the ground now. So again, we haven't been able to load it, but if you're on a more fertile site, again, it depends on your soil test.
Great, thanks, Darren. So there's one more question for you, and then 2 for Doug. So from Sandra Yanni, and thank you for your interesting presentation. They just would like an example of a problem from bale grazing on native range.
Again, I'm not an agronomist, I'm an ecologist. So putting weed species and Kentucky bluegrass on native range, we already have enough of it, right? So introducing non-native plants on a native range, I think that's an issue and typically when you feed bales, weeds come, right? So that's something that I would be worried about. So our native grasses give us much needed feed, so I'd rather have them.
And okay, thanks, Darren. Looks like Wyatt wanted to add to that as well.
Nope, I'm good. I'm just clicking the answered live button.
Okay.
Yeah.
Super. Okay, and from Dan, this is looks like this is to Doug. Are you finding challenges in penciling out bale grazing with some of these last few drought years and the high cost of feed?
Nope, I don't. I'm still doing it. Everybody's farm is different, and the amount of cattle that you're feeding and the method that you use to feed them will change the economics for everybody's farm. But for mine, I'm a relatively small operation. We actually bale graze about 50, 60 cows. And my cost for running a machine is far too high for any benefit I might get out of less feed use. The feed used or the feed left varies with the system, and definitely this is just my experience over the years. The most efficient feeding system was chopped silage in bunks. There's very little left over from that system, but I haven't seen anything else that comes to close to that. I've got 7 or 8 different types of bale feeders over the years. Every one of them I haven't been completely happy with, and I don't know how much really they save as compared to just letting the cows graze the bales. But like I say, everybody's economics are different. Everybody's situation is a little different. So you got to work it out for your farm.
Thanks, Doug. There's another one for you regarding, do you find that you have a higher weed intake in your bale grazing areas? And are you able to manage the weeds that do come in?
I really haven't had a lot of trouble with weeds in my bale grazing areas. We have one weed here that is everywhere around the country, and it's called tall buttercup. And I haven't found a good way of suppressing that with any management. Nothing seems to work really great on that. The other grasses are much more robust in the bale grazing patches, but so is the buttercup. So I don't know. I haven't got an answer for you for that.
Okay. And there's another one as well. What are you using for bales as far as hay and green feed? Are you using a mix?
I've got mixed hay bales that I'm using this year. Some alfalfa, orchard grass, timothy, and generally that's what I use. I do also use green feed bales from time to time. Just whatever I have, that's what I use. Yep.
Okay. Looks like you're going to be having the bulk of these questions, Doug. A lot of great questions coming in. We've one from Stephanie that they're very keen to do this. They get over 30 inches of precipitation annually. And this year's been a lot of days with frost coming out of the ground. So they're worried about the hoof action damaging the pastures during warm and wet periods. So they have a lot of heavy forested areas used for silvopasture and could use for winter bale during those soft ground periods. Is there any ecological reason not to do this? So between you and Darren, if you could answer that. Most of the people want soil building in the pasture and not in the trees, but this would be a potential adaptation to prevent damage on the soft ground. So for both of you, your comments on dealing with soft ground and forested areas.
Darren might be better at this than me for this one, I'm thinking.
Okay.
So this practice is used in Tennessee. It's used in Oklahoma, right? So it's and their ground never freezes, but you are going to get pugging, and it's gonna. I would probably stay away from it if your ground's not frozen. So that's one of the benefits our prairies have, and that's why they can do these 21-day moves. You would never do that in Tennessee because your ground would be pugged up, right? So that's a challenge. I don't think with the shading and everything of the feeding them within a silvopasture, I'd be interested, of course. That's a scientist part of me, but I don't know if that would work. Wyatt's more of a forester, so maybe Wyatt can. No.
Yeah, I don't have an answer.
All right. Well, appreciate it. Okay, and I think one of the big ones, I'll just go through here. Are there any proven strategies for managing elk with a winter bale graze setup?
Just the 3D fences up in a piece, right? But I don't know. I think actually Mike on this call has a lot of experience dealing like keeping elk out, right? And it's very difficult. It's very difficult. I can't see how how you could do it.
Okay, and I think this
Fortunately.
will also be for you, Darren. I know I think if someone had the answer for that, that would just be fantastic. Is there more wastage with bale grazing system versus a swath grazing system? Do you have any information on that?
Yeah, Doug's done both. So Doug, why did you get out of swath again? Was it the wildlife?
Yes, if I'm not muted here. Yeah, wildlife was our biggest challenge with swath grazing. As far as the wastage, I don't know. There's probably more left in the swath grazing, but it's spread out more, so it's really hard to tell. But I should tell you, I've made a change. I didn't swath graze for several years because of wildlife, and they move in and eat all the best part, and I get very little left for my livestock. What we did this year is we set up and we started swath grazing the 1st of October. And so we were done swath grazing a little bit into November, long before the deer decided that they needed to get into it, which worked really well for us. And then we went back on pasture until just before Christmas. One thing that I forgot to mention when we were talking about that last question is I set out my bales so that I have the better feed. The cow's nutrition requirements goes up as the winter goes on, as they get closer to calving. And so I set mine up with the poor feed first and the best feed last. That's one thing that I should have mentioned that I hadn't. But.
Super, thanks. And I think we'll just have our final question, and that is also for you, Doug, if you had any problems with the portable shelters and the wind.
Oh, we have. Those ones there are mounted solid, pounded posts into the ground, but I do have portable windbreaks. And yeah, from time to time here, the wind will come along and upset them for you. You bet.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. That was a really terrific presentations, and the questions from the participants, those were excellent. And Wyatt, if you can pull up the last slide, we just really appreciate everybody joining us here today, and especially from across the provinces. We've got 3 more webinars, and our next one is also a collaboration looking at raising standing corn. And we will have Vern Barron from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, also from Alberta, and with the Devick Ranch here from BC, who tried that. So they'll have some really interesting information for folks. Following that, we're going to have to Dr. Jillian Bernard for webinar 4, talking about cover crops. And again, we're also going to have ranchers with their experience and how their cattle and what they've seen the benefits of this, and also some of the challenges. And finally, we're going to round it out with Dr. Bart Lardner from the University of Saskatchewan, because of course, with any system that you're moving to, what are the nutritional implications to your cattle? And we've heard Doug talk a lot about that today and how he's managed for that. So that'll be our final webinar. So help you look at some of the management considerations for the livestock nutrition. So thanks very much, everyone, and I'll turn it over to my colleague Wyatt for his final thoughts and words.
Yeah, thank you, Karen, and apologies to all of those. We had some hiccups with Eventbrite. I'm glad that many of you could still join us, hopefully by some means. So it was great having you. These, as I mentioned at the start, this is a recorded session, so we will definitely publish those, and you'll be able to see those at any time. And I especially want to thank our presenters, Darren and Doug. That was great having you guys, and we learned lots. That was a great session. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And with that, we'll see you all next week. Same time, same place. Have a great week.